When you're driven, the need to accomplish a goal is relentless. Hard work and ambition compel you to do whatever's necessary. In my work as a personal injury trial lawyer for 18 years, it's common to meet driven people. Those with drive can have different personalities, careers, or backgrounds, but they possess one common factor. Despite their passions, driven people want to surround and motivate themselves with other driven people. If you want to learn how to overcome obstacles by learning from others, then tune in here. This is the Driven Crowd Podcast. Thank you for tuning in to episode 11 of the Driven Crowd Podcast, fueled by Snelling's Law. I'm your host, Scott Snellings. Today, we're going to be speaking with a businesswoman, pet lover, newly elected Frisco City Councilwoman, and right now, a high-flying Texas Tech graduate. I first met Laura in our Leadership Frisco class 25.
Best class ever.
Absolutely. Of course, this was before her meteoric rise to fame once she was elected to City Council. So I can say I knew Laura way back when. She's a very interesting lady, and I'm super excited to have her on the podcast. Laura Rummel, welcome to the Driven Crowd Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. Walk us back. Where'd you grow up? And we'll start from there.
So I can claim that I am a born Texan. I was born in good old Lubbock, Texas.
As was I.
Really?
I was.
I was born at Reese Air Force Base.
Okay.
And so my father was military, Air Force, and he retired the exact same week I graduated from high school. So literally my entire life was spent being an Air Force brat. Lived probably 12 different places, even spent 3 years in Bangkok, Thailand.
Oh, wow.
But then after a short stint at the University of New Mexico, decided Lubbock was home and went back and finished my education at Texas Tech University. First job out of college ended up being here in the Dallas area, and then have been here pretty much ever since, other than a short stint in New York City for 2.5 years. It's been my entire life has been in the Frisco area now.
Awesome. I think about every guest we've had on here has some sort of ties to the military. It's not planned. It just ends up that way. And I don't even know it until I start talking to people a lot of times too. So you embraced the term Air Force brat, it looked like.
Absolutely.
You smiled when you said it. Why?
I do think we're our own breed. So we come with certain characteristics of being adaptable, but we're also... in some cases, we can be very driven, I think is a good word under this podcast, where we have our own mentality of things. And we're also very passionate about certain things. So I think brat is a very good terminology of, it's a very affectionate way to put it.
All right. And so tell me, what was life like growing up as a military brat?
I'd never trade it. I know some people probably would, but going to a different place every couple of years, you learn to be around all sorts of people. You learn to make friends, and you learn to adapt to your surroundings. So, using the same example, moving to Bangkok, Thailand, we're definitely not the norm population. My sister has very blonde hair, and so buses would put their faces up against the window to stare at her because of her blonde hair. But just learning about different cultures, how people have grown up. I think one of the core memories in my mind is, seeing people who lived over what's called the Klong, which is essentially their sewer system over there. And that's how people lived. And that has stuck with me my entire life, of how grateful I am to be in a place that I am, in a country where, we have all sorts of freedoms, and also we have so many opportunities. And that's been something I've been forever grateful for.
Wow. How old were you when you lived in Thailand?
Late elementary, early middle school.
And so what was that like, being in a place for 2 to 3 years, making these friends? It takes a couple of years to kind of get in with the crowd, right? To get to know people, to develop some of those relationships, and then say, all right, see ya, I'm out of here. And I assume, too, that there were probably other military brats in school with you. Is that right?
There were. Yeah,
okay.
There absolutely were. In many cases, so Air Force bases are, I think, a little bit more unique, because a lot of times they're placed in areas that have a lot of desert area around them for fighter pilot training. You need some place to be able to practice bombing. So lot of the areas that we lived in were very much supportive of the Air Force Base because that helped the economy of the town. It helped it to thrive. So yes, were there some challenges sometimes? Yes, especially as you got farther into like high school, for example. Getting in was a little bit more difficult, but at the same time, you had so many people that were supportive of the base that, I never really even realized it until looking back as an adult, being able to see how a little bit more difficult it could be in sometimes.
And so we all kind of have this, or at least those of us who haven't served, have this impression of the military as this very regimented entity. Did you grow up in a regimented household, or was it more like dad had enough of that at work, come home, kind of do whatever you want?
I wouldn't say he was regimented. My parents were strict. And I think that is what drove a lot of the mentality of us growing up, though, is so instead of it necessarily being, you get up at this time, you do your homework at this time, we weren't to that level, but it was very much of, okay, what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? And what are you doing to force that, to make that happen? So I think that type of mentality definitely rubbed off. That's
super interesting. And so when it comes to goals and then breaking those goals down and what are you doing today to move closer towards those goals, at what point did y'all start having those conversations, or was it a specific conversation?
Well, in some cases, I think early on, the goals were set for us, right? It was, okay, your GPA needs to be this. Or if we were going into, like, I was very much into gymnastics and cheerleading growing up. And so it was like, well, do you want to make the squad? Do you want to make this level of gymnastics? Like, these are the things you're going to have to do to be able to get to that next level. So I think some of them were just naturally just happened because they saw something that I wanted to go for. And so they would say, okay, well, if you're going to do that, you need to practice for it. You need to be able to prepare for it. And so I think those started just naturally happening.
Okay. And as a parent myself, I'm always intrigued by how parents develop goals with their kiddos and teach them about goals. So it sounds like a lot of it was natural, but at what point did they kind of take their foot off the accelerator and you just kept going with that?
Probably college would be my guess. Definitely there were some goals in high school that I think they set for me. So again, my younger sister is the school person. She was valedictorian, so she had straight A's. That was not me. So it was a very good thing that I went first because I didn't have to live up to that expectation. But it wasn't until college that it was more of like, okay, you're on your own. Your destiny is now yours. So you make your appropriate decisions to move forward. And if they ever thought my dad is phenomenal playing devil's advocate, which I appreciate even more so now being at the age that I am, because I can bring a problem to him and how I think I'm looking to solve it. And he'll play it back from a different perspective of, well, have you considered this? Have you thought of this? And in some cases, it used to make me angry when I was a kid saying, why don't you believe in me? Why don't you support me? But it was very much of trying to get me to look outside my initial mindset.
That is amazing. And so when would your dad kind of start playing devil's advocate? Was it as far as you can remember back, or was this as more you entered into more like your logical thinking years, your high school, and then on to college?
I think probably more in college. So, and for high school, he had to travel a lot with the Air Force. He was even deployed for a period of time while I was in high school. But definitely while I was in college, and I can very clearly remember a couple things early into my professional career. I'm thinking when I first bought a house or when I first got a dog of my own, all of those things were some of the big ones very early on where we had some pretty intense conversations.
So did he set it up for you as a, hey, Laura, let me just play devil's advocate here. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Or was it just more of like a questioning, hey, you haven't thought about this? What are you going to do if this happens?
It was probably more so than the latter. He definitely didn't preface it as I'm very intentionally playing devil's advocate. It was more of, well, I don't know that you fully thought about X, Y, and Z, and be the fatherly advice of, have you really thought this through? And I think it was probably more that.
Interesting. Okay. And so let's jump. You mentioned that your dad was deployed. What age were you when that occurred?
I was junior in high school.
Okay, so difficult time for any high school student, their junior year, kind of trying to get the grades up as high as possible before you start applying for colleges the next year. How did you deal with that with your dad being gone?
Honestly, I think the brunt of that fell on my mom, having 2 teenage daughters at home by herself. Like, looking back, I am very sympathetic to her. I guess my grades were always decent. Like, they were B's and A's. They were always pretty good. But I was very lucky where I had a teacher in my school that knew of my situation and was very supportive of me through that. So I also had my best friend, even still to this day, her parents are like a second set of parents to me. So they were another source that I had available to me at that time.
Gotcha. All right. And so you graduate high school, you move on to, what was the first college you attended?
I went to the University of New Mexico for 1 semester. I had a cheerleading scholarship.
Okay. And then you said, no, not doing that.
Not for me. It was a very interesting time. The state of New Mexico had passed a lottery scholarship where if you had graduated from a New Mexico high school, you could go to a New Mexico college for basically free tuition.
Wow.
And so the average age of a student jumped up to their 30s. And it was a very different experience. And I decided I'd gotten into a car wreck, so I wasn't going to continue cheerleading because my back was kind of messed up. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to go where I actually want to go, which was Texas Tech.
Gotcha. So did y'all have like 30-year-old cheerleaders and things like that?
We did not have any. We actually, one of the guys was. Now that I think about it,
oh wow!
In our co-ed, one of the guys was a little bit older, but for them, I cheered on the all-girl squad, and we were all the normal, late teen, early 20s.
Gotcha. All right. So then you transition over to Texas Tech.
Yes, Wreckham.
All right. My dad went to Texas Tech, and they had a big win last weekend. I don't know when you're going to be listening to this, whoever's out there, but they beat the University of Texas last weekend.
Yes, they did.
There's a huge smile on your face right now.
I think I was about to have a heart attack as that was going on. I actually even mentioned to some of my UT friends, I was like, okay, I'm going to go watch this game, and I'm not going to trash talk because I'm pretty sure y'all are going to beat us. So the fact that we actually beat them was fantastic. I think their showing against Alabama kind of scared me a little bit going into that game, but was
and then as soon as
thrilled.
the final whistle, did the trash talk begin?
I held back.
All right.
I held back.
Good for you.
I held back. But oh yes, I was thrilled, jumping around like a crazy person.
All right. So Texas Tech, and would you graduate with a degree in?
Marketing.
Okay. Is that something you always knew you wanted to do or something you fell into?
Oh, I had 5 different majors, actually.
You're one of those.
I was one of those. But another great place where my parents influenced is that they made me go talk to somebody. In any one of the things that I said I wanted to do, they said, okay, you should go talk to somebody who actually does that for a living and give more of a perspective of what they do on a day-to-day basis.
Love it.
Genius. So I had physical therapy, I had marine biology, I had nutrition. The sciences took me out of nutrition pretty quickly. But I'm very much a math person, but science was not something I super enjoyed. So then going eventually into business, when I started taking business classes, it was just common sense to me. And so I was like, oh, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be. And then ended up doing that. And then later did my MBA at SMU.
All right, Cox School of Business. It's so difficult when we ask 18-year-olds to go pick a life career and you have zero experience. It's not like you have any apprenticeship. It's not like you've even tried much of anything. We do a little bit better job now. I mean, we have in our office right now, we have a high school intern who, is with us for the year and is getting to see what things look like in a law firm to see if she's interested in that. And I think a lot of the schools are doing more technical programs. In fact, we learned a lot about that in our Leadership Frisco class to see all of the different programs that kids can kind of, quote unquote, try out to see if they like it, which is fantastic, right? Especially, it's just as important to figure out, yes, I really do like that, as opposed to, no, I hate that. And I think that's just a huge benefit that I know they offer around here in the city. So you end up a businesswoman. You get your MBA from SMU. What do you do out of school?
Well, I only got my MBA 10 years ago, but right out of undergrad, I went and worked for a company called Newell Rubbermaid. Yes, Rubbermaid. They owned Sharpie, they owned Levolor blinds, they owned a ton of different products. And I was selling into Home Depots So physically going store to store, selling end products into Home Depot. One of their products was even a torch company. So I learned how to sweat pipes.
Nice.
And so my dad was like, my daughter's doing what? I'm sorry. I was using the saws that are in stores, building displays. It was definitely a great opportunity for me to learn that I could do things that I never thought I would do, or even dreamed of doing, for that matter.
You didn't even know what sweating a pipe was.
No, had no clue. Had no clue. I just thought they fit together, like they screwed in or something. No, that's not what happens. So went to work for them for a little while, and then did a stint in pharmaceutical sales, realized that was not for me, and then came back to consumer products. So spent 10 years about in consumer products, and then my last 10 years of my career have been spent in payments.
Okay. So tell me this. You're going into Home Depots, and somebody presumably tells you, all right, here's what's going to go down. You're going to start learning how to weld. You're going to start learning how to saw. You're going to start learning how to use every tool, that you need to set up these different things. What's going through your head?
Okay, cool.
All right. Zero idea what you're walking into, but challenge accepted.
Yeah. I'm not going to say I've never been, fearful of something, but I have been fairly open to learning new ideas, new concepts, new things. So especially if someone's willing to train me, great. Let's check it out.
So let's dive into that a little bit, because that's a huge mindset shift for most people, right? Most people, I would say, and maybe this is overgeneralization, but I believe most people, when you present them with something new, their first reaction is fear, right?
In some cases, yeah.
Yeah, fear, or I don't want to do that. I don't want to learn. I'm comfortable where I am. I don't want to push myself. That's not you. That's not your mentality.
No, definitely not. One of the things that I've been very good with in my career and am known for is change management. Is looking at future opportunities, looking at something, and actually bringing people along with me through that change. And I've had to do that multiple times throughout my career, where we've had significant, whether that's either executive changes or process changes, being able to say, guys, it's not going to be that bad, or just trust me, or hey, this is how this is going to benefit us, and let's move forward. Let's just try it. Let's see what happens if we do this and see how it's going to impact us on the other side. And I think it's been very valuable to have that type of mindset, being a leader, and helping to bring people along for those big changes.
And being a leader, let's jump into the next part here, which is you're a politician.
I am, which is crazy to think, but yes.
When was the first time you thought to yourself, you know what, maybe I want to run for office?
My husband and I would probably say two different times. He would say, we were watching TV and there was some hearing, this was years ago, and I just remember hearing the guy speaking, and I remember looking at my husband and saying, I could do better than this idiot. So he would say that was probably the first time. For me...
Wait, so y'all just sit around and watch hearings?
This one was a big one.
Okay.
This was not like an everyday occurrence. We don't just sit around watching C-SPAN or something.
I was about to say, we got some other things to address here then.
Yeah, a little bit more of a social life. I guess for city council specifically, after we moved back from New York City, which was about 5 years ago, I started getting a lot more involved in the city and paying attention to it. And I can credit one of our former city councilmen for that, who kept me updated on what was going on in Frisco while we were gone. So when we moved back, I started paying a lot more attention, seeing how I could get more involved. And I was sitting through a strategic work session, which usually happens twice a year. And this one particularly was the Vision 2020 goals. It was January of 2020. I remember very clearly. And they were outlining what they wanted the city to accomplish over the next 10 years.
And this is just as a normal, regular citizen?
Yeah, these are open meetings. No,
like
these are open meetings, so anybody can attend. I had gone to speak to them specifically about pets, and then I decided to stick around to learn a little bit more about it. And as they were talking about what they were looking to do, they said that they wanted to bring more small businesses to Frisco, specifically targeting financial technology. that's what I do for a living, having worked for Amex, PayNearMe, and now PayPal. I was like, oh, I might actually be able to help with that. Then they started talking about what they wanted to do with Grand Park. And we had, in New York City, we had been members of the Central Park Conservatory, and we saw how they maintained that and developed it and continued to work on it. I was like, oh, I think I could bring some of those ideas here as well. So all of those all together, and I knew there was an open position coming up where an incumbent wasn't rerunning, and I kept thinking about it. I was like, I think I could actually help with some of the priorities that they're looking to accomplish. And that's when I decided to first run.
All right. So from your first city council meeting that you attended, or this vision meeting that you're talking about, and you decided to run, how long was it before you actually put your name on the ballot?
It was very quick because it was open at that time. So it was within 2 weeks, I think. It was very quick. It was very, very short period of time. So, and that was the year that, so normally city council, filing opens in January, closes in February, middle of the month. And then they run in May. Well, that was the year that COVID hit, and COVID pushed it out to November. So it became a very short race, went to a very long race. And it very much changed all of our campaign strategy. It changed the ability that we had to even compete, honestly, because we had much more time to access the population. We had a much broader amount of people coming to the polls because it was a presidential election. So, I have one of the most votes ever cast for a city councilman and lost. I came in second that one. I made the runoff, but because we had so many people coming out to the polls, we had so many people involved in our city council race, which was very exciting to see.
Wow. So at what point did you realize, oh my gosh, there is so much more that a city council person does than, pets and parks and whatever it was that you heard at that meeting?
Oh, I knew it before that meeting.
Okay.
I knew, all the different laws that you have to, be familiar with, all the things the history that you're looking at and understanding, looking at how can we improve things. My husband says my superpower is being able to see 2 steps, 5 steps into the future and know what's going to happen. I think it drives him nuts sometimes. But being able to look at a situation and look at future state and see what that's going to the end result is going to be. We could see that as Frisco was growing. I mean, I moved here in 2002. My husband joined in 2008. But just to see the growth and the impact that Frisco had during that time, and looking at the decisions that were made 20 years ago or even 40, 50 years ago are still affecting us now.
Sure.
And we hear a lot about that in city council. So understanding the impacts, I knew that way before.
Gotcha. Let's talk about the campaign for a minute. This is the first campaign you'd ever run.
Yes.
What were your big takeaways?
There was a lot I didn't know. I am now a social media expert, which I was not prior. I can tell you how to build campaigns for marketing. I had a marketing background, obviously. So actually applying that to a campaign. I have an analytics background. And so, one of the things I did was just looking at, where do my signs need to be placed? Well, what's the most analytical way that I can, use my resources? Because I think I had, a quarter, maybe not even half of the signs of what most people put out. So how do I get the most bang for my buck for that? So a lot of my business acumen was then translated into a different way. But there were just finding the vendors that need to support you in that type of thing was new and had required research. So yeah, there was just a lot I didn't know, but again, very capable of learning and figuring things out.
And so, you have this campaign going. When you first start, what's your mindset? Is your mindset, it is win or, I'm never going to do this again? Is it, I'm going to get out there, I'm going to do my absolute best, and I hope that the voters choose the best person? What is the mindset going into something like this?
I knew that having been a person that hadn't been very publicly available in Frisco was probably going to be a little bit of a challenge to win the first time I ran. And someone even told me, they're like, hey, it's very possible you may run once, get your name out there. Next time you run, you'll be successful, which is ended up being what happened. But taking it and saying, okay, who am I? What do I stand for? How do I put that in writing? Now, how do I communicate that to the voters? How do I get them to know who I am, understand who I am, and how I would serve them moving forward? So it was very much a strategy. It was sitting down and saying, what can I do to make an impact, and how do I get people to understand the value that I bring?
How is that exercise? I think most of us internally know, the things that we stand for and the things that we want to pursue and the direction, but actually putting it down on paper in a comprehensive way.
Yep.
How was that?
That was, I have a very good proofreader in my husband. So I would take a first.
And he knows where you're making stuff up too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Neither of us would ever do, try to BS anything through stuff. So, but it was very much of, how do I put something down? I would take the first draft, and then he would take a look at it and say, well, do you mean this by this? Do you mean this by this? And it was either yes or no. And if it was no, okay, well, let's tweak it a little bit. If it's yes, okay, how do we make that much clearer? And so he's, I joke that he's the grammar police, but it was a good benefit to have.
Well, but the great part of that is it really clarifies something. You can't get away with being vague on something if you have somebody calling you out and say, well, okay, well, what do you mean here? Mm-hmm. And so if somebody wanted to sit down and go through this exercise, whether they're running for office, whether they're interviewing for a job, whatever it is they're doing, structurally, how did you do it? Where did you start? Did you use some sort of a book or a form or what?
I didn't. It was very much, again, having a goal-setting mentality of, okay, well, what do I want people to know about me? What is my brand? And I had gone through that exercise previously as a professional. So looking at it as, well, what do I want my brand to be as an individual, a city councilman? So looking at what are the core things do I want people to know about me, and really drafting those out. And then being able to see, okay, well, how have I been able to exhibit that so people can see that, tie that back to something, and then list those out. So that's probably as far as structurally that I went for that particular initiative.
Gotcha. Okay. So my law partner, Rocio, ran for a state rep seat a couple of cycles ago, and it was brutal. Mm-hmm. The schedule was unreal. I don't know how she did it, quite frankly. But even more so than that was the nastiness. I personally sat there and watched her go through her Facebook comments and private messages, direct messages, and to see some of the things that people with their name attached to it were willing to say was unreal. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, I think that's what discourages a whole lot of qualified people from running, is they just don't want to deal with that.
I would completely agree with that.
And so how did you, obviously you got to have thick skin, mm-hmm. right? But some things hurt, right? Especially on and on and on and on. And so how did you deal with that?
I think growing up as a military brat, you realize that people will have different perspectives that you do, just because of their background, of, their life situations. They are going to look at things differently. And I think when you take a step back and realize this person believes this because of whatever reason, and being able to say, okay, well, these people may not have it accurately, but from their perspective, it is. And so there was only one situation where I had to call the police because someone made online threats towards my family. And that was where I drew the line. That's unacceptable. But other than that, having to say, well, these people don't know this about me. Or these people, their political motivation is that they want to motivate people by fear. So they're going to put something forward that makes people fearful of me. So they might not know what's actually true and what's not. And being able to take a step back to say, I know that's not true, and being self-confident enough to say, okay, well, they can say that, but that's not actually accurate. And being confident in that it goes a long way. And then also having really good conflict management skills. I've done business development and account management for many years. So I've dealt with relationships that, sometimes go south or things happen that you have to resolve. And using that to, if someone has a perspective of me and I know they're a real human being, they're not just someone trying to, poke at you that under a false name. If I know they're a real human being, a lot of times I'd reach out to them and say, hey, would you like to grab coffee? Because I think you might have a misunderstanding of me. Some of them will take you up on it. A lot of them won't. But I think that helps to people to understand that there's actually a human being behind the comments that they're making. And thankfully, some of them I've had really good conversations with, and we've come out with a better understanding of we might actually align in some areas. We might not align in everything, and that's okay, but we can still respect each other's opinions. And I think that's the angle you have to go at with this.
And I think that's an important characteristic to have, is to try to be able to, first and foremost, set your ego aside, right? Because that's really what's hurting when people are criticizing you, regardless of the level of nastiness with it, is your ego, right? It hurts. But if you can set that aside and look at them with a curiosity of, okay, well, why is that? Why do you feel that way? Or why do you take that position? Or why do you think I'm wrong on that? And genuinely want to know, then I think that is a huge separation point for people who are going to be successful and those who just aren't.
Being willing to learn.
Yes,
Someone
absolutely.
may have a perspective I have not considered. So why not sit down and talk with them and learn their perspective? I have changed my mind on something before because they said, well, this is why I believe the way I believe, and give me some of the pros and cons and the ramifications for it. And it's like, oh, I actually haven't thought about it that way. You know what? You might actually have a better solution than I do. And I'm okay with admitting that.
Yet it seems like most, and I'm going to just use the word general, politicians have such a hard time reversing course when new information is presented. It is, hey, once you dig your heels in on something, you cannot move.
Oh, yeah, they could call you a flip-flopper or something. And I think that's one of the things that we're very lucky from a city council perspective, because we're in a nonpartisan race.
Right.
So I think regardless of what we're dealing with, and as we're moving forward, we're not dealing with some of these really heavy issues that people are having to deal with. So as the information evolves, we can share that information and say, hey, this is something that's come to light, and this is why my position's changed. And so we're able to explain why that has happened, I think, a little bit better than necessarily a partisan viewpoint where your party has made up the mind on this is our stance on this. And if you deviate from that, you are not this particular political party. And I don't think that's necessarily fair, because I think everybody's entitled to their own opinion, and it might not be 100% alignment.
You can have your own opinion. You just can't have their money anymore.
Right.
All right. So we get to election night. You get all the way through the campaign. Walk us through election night. What's that like?
So my best friend came into town and was helping poll greet with us that day. And we're picking up signs all around the different voting locations. And she asked me, she's like, well, how do you think this is going to go? And I said, I think I'm going to come in third.
Interesting.
And that was November 2020. She's like, I think I'm going to come in third. And then shortly after that, my husband calls me and says, early voting results are up. You're in second place. And I just went, oh my God. Okay, we might actually make the runoff. So going through that was adding another month on top of that back in 2020 was definitely mentally and physically exhausting. But at the same time, having gotten so close, when that position opened up again the very next year after who I lost to ended up stepping down, it was like, yeah, we've done this before. We've done the long haul. We've done it for a year. Surely we can do it for a couple of months. And was able to jump right in towards the end of 2021 and then ultimately get elected. That night was a very different experience.
I would imagine so.
The first night, again, it went to a runoff. But going into the night that I actually won, I had tons of support from friends, family, neighbors. And so it was less of a COVID time. And so we actually had, a group of people together watching it as the results came in and seeing the results. It was a fairly tight race for the runoff this last time. So, but finally seeing the final results come in was very, very exciting to see that all the work that we had done had finally paid off.
So you ran a full campaign, and then you ran a runoff campaign. Mm-hmm. And then how much longer after that did you have to hit the trail again for the open seat?
Oh, that was December 2020 was the runoff. And then the individual step down Thanksgiving week. So November 2021. So 11 months later before we got the heads up that was happening, and immediately jumped back in. I took a couple of days to really think about it. I had literally just started a job that Monday when I found out that Friday. Brand new job. And I had talked with them saying that this was something that I would likely do in the future, and I wanted to make sure they were okay with it. But I hadn't done any of the formal processes of, talking to legal, talking to ethics, like all the sign-offs that I would have to get that. So it took a couple of days over the weekend to really think about it, to say, okay, is this something we are going to do? And then started going through the process of my company to get the approvals to do it. Once we got the okays, we're like, okay, I guess we're doing this. So jump back in.
And so when that position came open and you made the decision, was it an excitement plus a, oh, you got to be kidding me kind of feeling?
A little bit, yes. Having gotten to the runoff and would have gladly have served, the full term and hopefully future. Yeah, it was a little bit frustrating because it's like we put all that effort and all that time and honestly money into it as well. Yeah. To have somebody step down after a year was, obviously a little disheartening, having been the runner-up. So having to run yet again for the same thing was like, okay, let's do it. Mentally, get back on board, get back in that headspace.
So you signed up for one campaign and ended up with basically 3.
Yeah, four.
4. Oh my goodness, I can't even imagine. All right, so I've always lived in smaller suburbs and cities, typically around here, with the exception of my time in Dallas. I never really thought much about what city council does. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. Some people think that that's their full-time job. That council people, that's their full-time job. That's all they do.
Nope.
And then other people like me was like, well, yeah, you meet once a month and you go to, some campaign events and you shake hands and hug babies and all that good stuff. From the 30,000-foot level, what does, at least in Frisco, what does a city council person do?
So, we have at least 2 meetings a month for council specifically, but that doesn't count the work sessions, the committees that you serve on. For example, I serve on the Budget and Audit Committee. I serve on the Legislative Committee. I serve on the Emergency Preparedness Committee. And I'm getting started an Animal Advisory Board. I'm the liaison for that. So those are 4 meetings right there that are already on top of city council meetings. There's a lot of preparation work that goes into. We don't just show up on Tuesday and that's the first time we've seen the information and we're voting on something that night. Like, we are getting the information at minimum days in advance for us to review, look at, ask questions to staff, making sure that we have full perspective so that when we go to vote, we know a little bit more about what we're voting on. In many cases, there have been work sessions that have led up to that, where we've learned, gone into a deep dive about what's going on, made recommendations on how we think the solution's going to move forward. So that is a considerable amount of time, and that's just from a council perspective. Yes, there's obviously plenty of events that we go to. I mean, we get invited to business openings. We probably have one every single day. So obviously we want to support the community as much as we can. So we're going to business openings, or I even went to a church opening this last Sunday. So there's a lot of expectations from the community to be involved in and support as well. The Frisco Inclusion Committee is hosting a big Latin Heritage Festival this upcoming weekend. And, we're sponsors, we're supporters, we're helping to promote it. We'll be there. So there's a lot more than just 2 times a month.
And you have a full-time job.
And I have a full-time job on top of this. So yes. So city council does not pay. We get $700 a month before taxes. That's it. So that basically pays for gas for all the different places that we go to.
Maybe.
Definitely doesn't pay for the coffees or the lunches that we pay for, because obviously we're a government employee, so we're very careful about what we can and can't do. But then, yes, I have a full-time job that I would kind of like to keep since it pays the bills. So
Right. Yeah, the $700 a month is not going
to
cut it and let go of your other job. So what has been the biggest surprise to you since joining council?
I would say I had a very good expectation of the time commitment that this was going to be, but it was even more so than I ever understood. Like I said, we get invited to something at least every day, sometimes many times. There was this past Saturday, I think I had 3 different events that I was invited to. So it's very much the time management of obviously wanting to support the community and doing what I can, but also making sure that I'm making time for myself to rest and recuperate, both mentally, physically. It's a balance that you have to very consciously take.
Well, it sounds like you've somehow been able to figure out how to create more hours in the day with
I
all
wish
of
I
that
could,
going on.
but I'm pretty sure I would fill them if I had more hours in the day.
Fair enough. All right, so Frisco has a lot going on.
We do.
A whole lot going on.
We do.
And so you're exposed to all different kinds of committees and different aspects of the city of Frisco, different leaders throughout Frisco.
Mm-hmm.
What are some foundational leadership principles that you've observed in the really good leaders that you've seen within the city?
So I grew up with a trust yet verify mentality. And I see that in a lot of the leaders within our community, where they have built a level of trust with the people that work with them and for them, that they know that they are capable and expertise in their jobs, and then they're letting them lead. They're giving them the authority to be able to drive whatever initiatives that they're working on. And then as long as they continue to be successful, continue to produce results, then we're good. And that's how I manage my team as well, is I trust you until I don't see results. Then we're going to have a different conversation. And I think giving people the leeway and the authority gives them purpose, gives them a mentality of, I can make a difference, I can make an impact, and also allows them to be very passionate about what they want to see happen. So it gives people more excitement around their job and what they're doing. So I think that is a big piece of what I've seen.
Okay. Flip side, the leaders who aren't so good that you've seen, clearly micromanagers, right? That would be the opposite of what you're talking about. But what else? What else do you see in the people who just aren't very good leaders? Maybe they're great at their job. Maybe they're great on being in the weeds. But when it comes to managing people, they're just not cutting it.
I think people that don't follow through on the things that they need to support their people. So if someone of your people comes to you and says, hey, I need support with this, I need help getting through this obstacle. If you don't follow through and actually help them break through that obstacle, then not only does that not set them up for success, but it also breaks the trust that they have in your leadership and you being able to support them in any future state. And I would say, I've only seen it a handful of times, but I have seen where people have not executed on something that they promised that they would, and then that ultimately just breaks trust.
Sure. There is, obviously, when you sit in on city council, how many city councilmen are there in Frisco?
There's 6 of us plus the mayor.
All right, so 6 leaders and a mayor. You get 7 leaders in a room. Tell us how the city of Frisco effectively manages that collaboration, the dissent, the discussion. How does that work? Because clearly Frisco is doing something right. Right? It's an amazing city. It's growing like crazy. They're sticking to the vision that was set long ago. How is that happening?
I think it's a good thing when you bring a diverse mindset to a group, right? That's the purpose of a board of directors, right? In business, is you intentionally bring people with different perspectives together. And I think that's one of the benefits that we have within city councils. We all come from different backgrounds. We all come from different perspectives. But we're all not afraid to share our opinions. So we're able to have, and trust me, there's plenty of things we don't agree on. But we're able to have a discussion that says, okay, well, this is where I think our challenges are going to be. How do we mitigate those challenges? How do we look at coming up with a better solution and using that diverse mindset to come together for a better solution that will ultimately be better for the citizens of the city? So I think that's been a huge strength of ours, is being able to have those productive conversations that where we don't agree, but we're still respectful. We're still trying to keep the best interests of the citizens in mind, and coming together with something that all of us can agree upon as the best solution under the circumstances we have.
And so when you come to that solution, what if it's a solution that you're just not on board with? You got outvoted. I'm sure that never happens, right?
I can think of one off the top of my head.
Yeah.
So,
but say that happens, how do you move forward past that?
I think that's another ego check where you just have to say, okay, well, I got outvoted. So more people think that this is not the right idea. So then, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. What is a different situation that could potentially help us to move forward? If it's something that, take the feedback from everybody else as to why they don't think that's the right decision, and use that feedback to say, okay, well then if I can come up with a solution that meets that feedback, then you might have a little bit more buy-in for future state. And being able to look at something objectively, taking out of your own lens and looking at it from other people's perspectives. And then honestly, sometimes you just have to go on to the next thing. So there's plenty of challenges that we have ahead of us. And if we want to continue to maintain the city to be to the standards we are, sometimes we're going to win some battles, we're going to lose some battles. But ultimately, there's plenty of other things that we can focus on and help to continue to build a quality of life that we've all come to expect.
What have you learned about yourself in your time on the council that maybe you didn't know before? Maybe either positive or negative.
Interesting. I don't know that I've actually considered that. I would say I already knew I was good at conflict management. I've had to do that with my career and contract negotiations plenty of times over. But being able to look at a situation, going back to what my husband said my superpowers were, I've definitely been able to see that in practice more, of saying, okay, here's a solution. How does that apply on an even bigger scale? If we're looking at this particular situation, what are the pros and cons of something like this happening, occurring? How do we minimize the negative impacts? And seeing that actually come to work, I think I've been able to recognize that superpower a lot better, and being able to say, this is where I am helping to benefit. These are the contributions that I'm able to make.
Gotcha, okay. In all of your spare time, which I think we've established is quite a bit, there's quite a bit of time that you spend on the couch, I'm sure. What do you do to grow?
I make an effort to talk to people. I try my best to have at least one coffee and one lunch a week where I'm talking to somebody new, where I'm trying to learn from their perspectives, their concerns of what's going on, the things that they're excited about. But I can honestly say there's not been a lot of spare time lately for reading books. And so I use the people, the citizens, as part of my education of, okay, well, what are your worries? What are your concerns? What are you excited about? And better understanding a different perspective, I think, helps grow.
What's one of the worries that has come up that surprised you? Maybe something you just hadn't considered or hadn't thought about?
There's definitely been some concerns within our multicultural community. And I've always found Frisco to be very diverse and very engaging, but there were still some concerns that people had. And so I've made a very specific effort to try to engage with those communities and getting to learn more about what their concerns are. And then when we've done something as a city to help support that type of concern, I've made sure to try and be a part of it and try to connect people with it. But it's definitely bigger than what I would have thought. And of course, me in my position, I can see how I would have missed that. But that doesn't give an excuse to ignore it moving forward.
Awesome. All right. Got to finish up here. We're out of time. A few quick questions. I know you're not reading right now, but you've read a lot, I'm sure. Favorite book?
Ooh.
You can give me a couple if you want.
So from a business perspective, I got to go with How to Win Friends and Influence People.
All right.
So that was classic. Read that early in my career, and I think it has been very impactful. From a sales perspective, there's a book called Who Moved My Cheese?
You're the second person to mention that book.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe Seth Denson was the other one that brought it up.
Okay. It's a good good perspective of looking at how do you create value, specifically with what you're selling, what you're moving towards. Personal book. Ooh, that might be hard. Like a fictional book. I say one of the most recent ones that I read, more recent, was Where the Crawdads Sing. I still have not seen the movie, which I need to do. But that was a fantastic book. I ended up reading it in 2 days because I couldn't put it down.
Wow. All right. You listen to podcasts?
Sometimes when I have time.
Do you have a go-to?
I don't. Honestly, a lot of the podcasts that I've listened to are ones that someone has sent to me. And said, you need to listen to this. I think you'd really enjoy it. Or, I was having lunch with Wes Pearson, our manager at the city yesterday, and he said, oh, there's this Wall Street Journal podcast on payments. And I was like, well, send it to me. I want to hear it. So that's next on my list. But yeah, I don't really have specifically a favorite.
Okay. And you watching anything right now? Or what's one of your favorite shows of late?
Ooh. So I was a huge Lord of the Rings fan.
All right.
And there's a new series coming out that's like a prequel to the Lord of the Rings movies. So that's probably the one that I'm most interested in right now.
Okay.
We're only a couple of episodes in, but just seeing how these characters have been created, the history behind the movies specifically. So that might be it.
Awesome. All right. Well, Laura, thank you so much for being here today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time.